My name's Gary Fincke, and I'm here as the moderator for this particular panel on independent publishers. And the publishers who are represented here are Dalkey Archive by Martin Riker, Akashic Books. I heard the pronunciation about 10 minutes ago, so at least I remembered it that long. And that's Johnny Temple. And First City Review, represented by Michael Pollock. Each of these panelists is going to speak for about 15 minutes. If they speak for 13 minutes, that's fine. If they speak for 16, the red light will come on and they'll stop. The idea is that if they each speak for 15 minutes and we do this on time, that there'll be about 15 minutes left over for people to ask questions from the audience. I hope you have some. My only job at that point then is to repeat the question so that those who are recording this will be able to hear what it is that you asked, and the panelists will fill in the blanks for you. After this panel, the next panel that's going to meet is the Journalists Roundtable, which is at the Scranton Times Auditorium, which is on Penn Avenue, and I bet most of you have a better idea where Penn Avenue is than I do. I at least know where North Washington Street is. I was there last night, and I found this place by accident. Center Street. Who would have thought that Center Street was... I just figured I couldn't miss it, but I was on foot. So I'd like to begin this as quickly as possible. Many of you have a program, and so you might read along with me, but I've been asked to introduce the panelists. What I'm going to do is just read their bio sketches to you. So if you have the program, you can read along, and if not, you'll hear this. And then, do we have any preference? Are we just going to start on this end and go across, or do you want to start on that end? Okay, so I'll start with Michael, and then we'll move across in that direction. Michael Pollock is the editor of the First City Review, a literary magazine out of Philadelphia, and the former managing editor of Fiction, a tenure which included fiction works selected for the Pushcart Prize and the O. Henry Awards. If any of you know those prizes, you understand that they're quite competitive. A former aerospace engineer, legal word processor, home renovator, publishing assistant, house painter, and assembly line worker. He's lived and worked in Boston, Los Angeles, New York, and Philadelphia. His work appears in Inside Magazine and elsewhere. Johnny Temple, who's sitting in the middle and will speak second, is the publisher and editor-in-chief of Akashic Books, an award-winning Brooklyn-based independent company dedicated to publishing urban literary fiction and political nonfiction. Temple won the American Association of Publishers 2005 Miriam Bass Award for Creativity in Independent Publishing. Temple also plays bass guitar in the band Girls Against Boys. And finally, Martin Riker is Associate Director of Dalkey Archive Press, a nonprofit literary organization, the leading publisher of international fiction, poetry, and nonfiction. Riker is also editor for the press's critical publications, the Review of Contemporary Fiction, and Context, a forum for literary arts and culture. His reviews and critical articles have appeared in a wide range of publications. If you're interested in these presses and what it is that they publish, there are book displays over at the Courthouse Square, where many of you have probably passed by, and panelists are reading throughout the day. So you might want to take a look at those after you leave this particular panel.
Also here in the store.
Yes, yeah, I saw it. Dalkey Archive was right. Dalkey Archive is right around the corner. Is it? Oh, okay. The presses are represented here too. Stop by immediately thereafter. Your captive audience, right? We'll try it that way. Yes, that goes with your admission. You have to look at the books on the table. Okay. All right. I think I did everything that I'm supposed to, and so my job is more or less over. Michael Pollock will speak first.
Hi. Good afternoon. Jotting down notes. Michael Pollock. I have a magazine called First City Review, and I'm really fascinated with literary magazines. I used to work with one fiction magazine, which is out of City College of New York, and that's where I went to do my graduate work. And I don't know, I can give you a brief history of literary magazines and where they came from, or why they're important to me. In the 70s, there was a huge budget that went out during the Carter administration that libraries could support literary magazines. So there was a huge proliferation of them during the 70s. And because you could start up a press and or a magazine, and you could get guaranteed subscriptions from the library. So fiction magazine where I worked started out of that, and it was sort of an idea and a thought, and it started over someone's kitchen table. Mark Mirsky, who was the editor there, and his mentor was Donald Barthelme. So I felt really inspired. I always feel inspired by the writing in the magazines. I always liked the magazines. So while I worked there, I had a great time, and then I moved to Philadelphia, and I was writing a novel, and it fell apart. And I sort of lost my community because I was in Philly and I didn't know anyone. And I thought, what better but start a magazine and get my community back, which is how it sort of ended up being, though a lot more spread out than I thought. But I don't know. I guess from my end of the spectrum, I think these guys represent some really exciting publishing, what they do. And they publish a lot of titles. I just do the magazine side. But I think writers who show up in my magazine or other literary magazines will end up in books with these guys. And it's a nice relationship. And I don't know. I'm really influenced by music, poetry, and fiction, and so I pour it into these magazines. I started out by getting, I think another reason why I moved to Philly to promote it in Pennsylvania, that there are a lot of opportunities for getting grants, even though this year is a tough year. I think that my magazine got a grant from a part of Pennsylvania Council of the Arts, and though it didn't pay for the whole thing, it's really inspiring to get someone to notice you and give you money. So that keeps me going, and it's another reason why Philadelphia, and it sort of has a grassroots politics going on that really keeps my magazine going. I publish yearly. I do print, not out of any other reason other than I just like print. There's plenty of online magazines that are out there that are terrific, and including I have a table outside on the square, and there are two other magazines that I have a table with who I love. JMWW, which is a magazine from Baltimore. Jen Mikulski, she's here, the editor. And Barrel House, which is out of DC, also publishes great work, really smart pop culture along with fiction, and they're out there too. So I think it's an exciting time in publishing in a lot of ways, and I'm nostalgic about the 70s, so it feels like the 70s to me, but that's just my interpretation of everything. But I think it's an exciting time because I think it's a writer's market in essence. I think the sky's the limit, that anyone like myself can start up something and make it, and then other people can just start with online magazines if that's what they choose to. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for writers and for editors, and there's great work coming out. So I don't know if that was 15 minutes, but I sort of exhausted.
No, it was less. So these guys could talk all day.
All right, I'll go next. And I think it's fine if I don't think I'll speak for a full 15 minutes either. It just allows time for us to answer questions that might interest you all. My name is Johnny Temple. I run Akashic Books, which is based in Brooklyn. We're an independent publishing company. We publish about 26 new books a year. It's mostly fiction. First I want to start by telling you all how happy I am to be here, and to thank Elizabeth Randall and Bill Black and the other festival organizers for putting this together. It's a really, really impressive event, and literary events of this nature for the public are really, really important right now. And so I think, it's nice to see that the mayor is also supporting this. And I think we need a lot more of this kind of thing. I'll talk about this more in a second. But if in New York, where I live, there's a lot of people in the publishing business that are constantly complaining about how no one reads anymore and how difficult it is to get work out there, et cetera, et cetera. But if people would roll up their sleeves and get involved in sort of community public literary events of this nature and be sort of proactive about it, instead of lamenting a bygone era when we got to read the great works of white men and no one else, straight white men. If we would spend less time lamenting the passing of that era and embrace the challenges of today, we could all have a much better attitude about what's going on in publishing, because sort of along the lines of what Michael was saying, that there is a lot of exciting developments going on right now, a lot of opportunities that are presenting themselves to more people than ever before. Not meaning to sound naive, I run a book publishing company and it is extremely difficult to do so, but it always has been. And for writers and publishers and editors, I think to expect it to be easy or to expect it to be lucrative is something that will lead to quick disappointment. To borrow the expression from CNN, I think this is these are actually some positive aspects that help keep all of us honest in terms of what we do and how we approach what we do. I started Akashic in 1997. At the time, I was a full-time rock and roll musician. I still play music occasionally, but I had a very good career playing in a band called Girls Against Boys. We were never a huge band, but we toured the world. We put out a bunch of albums, and we had a pretty successful career. And I actually made a bit of money. And in 1997, after signing a really good recording contract, and for the first time finding myself with some disposable income, I published a single book on a whim. I never intended to become a proper book publisher. It was more sort of a hobby I was doing while I was spending my time being a professional musician. But it was such a good experience publishing a book that I published a second book and then a third book. And after 3 or 4 years of publishing on a sort of hobby basis, I found that I had sort of developed a publishing bug. And I was also getting burnt out on the music business, which was becoming more and more of a bottom line industry, where it was more and more just about sort of profits and image and less about, artistic creation. And so I transitioned out of music and into book publishing company. I was fortunate to be able to start the company for a few years when I was making a living elsewhere, which was nice to not really have the financial pressure on me when I was getting my book publishing company going. Akashic we're not a nonprofit, and that presents certain challenges, but that's a position I'm sort of comfortable occupying, being a for-profit, though we have never actually had a profitable year. But, however, we have been breaking even for about 6 or 7 years now, and we grow. We're able to spend more money promoting our books, and we're getting better at what we're doing. And somewhere along the way, I started, drawing a modest salary, and I have a staff of 4 or 5 people. So though we've never turned a profit, breaking even is just fine with me. I mean, I need to earn more money. I have 2 little kids, and my staff needs to earn more money, and my authors need to earn more money. But I'm also actually quite proud of running an independent publishing company that is self-sustaining. My own music background has really influenced what I do as a book publisher. Playing in bands, moving from music to literature, made me acutely aware of how music obviously has a sort of bigger audience than literature tends to have. And yet I feel that the books that I'm publishing are just as exciting as the music that I was playing was. And one of my missions as a publisher is to work with other independent companies and people who are in it for what I would consider the right reasons to make literature more vibrant in today's culture. I don't think that literature could ever compete with music, because music hits people on a much more immediate, visceral level than literature does. But I think we can do better with literature. And again, my perspective on it is very much framed by living in New York. And New York likes to look in at itself. And it's a very elitist publishing business, which I find a total turnoff. And I think that we should be looking outwards rather than inwards. Instead of complaining that no one reads, we need to be actively looking at trying to build a more literate culture, a literate society, reach out to communities that have been traditionally ignored by the publishing business. And I think that public book festivals like this one are a key way of doing that. I'm also one of the lead organizers of the Brooklyn Book Festival, which we just had our 4th festival this year. And Brooklyn is a great place to do this because it's one of the most diverse geographic places on the planet, and you have whole giant communities of people that the whole publishing business right across the river in Manhattan doesn't even seem to know anything about. And yet this to me is part of where the future and the success of book publishing lies, is just broadening our horizons. Our little motto at Akashic Books is reverse gentrification of the literary world, which is tongue-in-cheek, but there's also some truth to it, in terms of that being our approach. And to be clear, I'm not talking about dumbing down literature. I'm not saying we should reach more people by publishing less sophisticated material. I consider our books to be very sophisticated, but I would also like to think that you don't need a college degree to appreciate a lot of the books that we publish. Some of the focuses in our program is we have a strong focus on the African diaspora, which includes African American writers, Caribbean writers, writers from Africa. It's just a small part of the list, but it is an area that we spend a lot of time sort of harvesting. We publish a lot of Latin American writers, and we publish a lot of American writers. We have a noir series, an anthology series of city-based books like Brooklyn noir, Los Angeles noir, Chicago noir, and each one of these books is about 14 to 16 stories by different writers, each writer setting their story in a different neighborhood or location within the book. And this is an area that has been very successful for us. We publish a little bit of poetry. Most of the poetry we publish is curated by the awesome Nigerian fiction writer and poet named Chris Abani, whose work, if you've never read it before, I urge you to read it. His debut novel, which we didn't publish, is called Graceland, which is set in Lagos, Nigeria. It's phenomenal. And then there's 2 novellas that we did publish. One is called Becoming Abigail, and the other is called Song for Night. And he has other books as well. He's been a huge inspiration to me, and we're very proud to host his poetry series, which is called Black Goat. We also publish a little bit of political nonfiction. Most of it's sort of left-wing, though I'd like to think of our list in general as being non-ideological, though I myself am politically progressive. I'm a left-wing guy, so that is reflected in our list, but we do have an occasional right-winger on our list as well, and I find it actually strangely important because again, I don't want to publish in a way that's exclusive or elitist. Our noir series, which I just mentioned, is a good example of it. I mean, there's nothing. All the stories are very gritty, but I would like to think that those books can appeal to everybody across the political spectrum. I have I brought a few catalogs of our list, which I can give out after the program if anyone is interested. And also I have a little mailing list which you can sign up if you'd like to get occasional emails from us once every couple of months about new releases and public events around the country. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was that ebooks are okay. Perhaps there's some disagreement, I have no idea, but The literature, a lot of people, book lovers, are freaked out about the digitization of books. And again, I wanted to say we need to embrace the challenges that are facing us. I may never read a book on a digital device. I love printed books. That's sort of what drew me into book publishing. But more and more people are starting to buy books in a digital format. And we are now making our books available on Kindle and on Sony ebook and etc. And I know it freaks a lot of people out, but I think it's something that I always like to say the period for complaining about this is about to expire. So get your complaints out there, and then wake up to the 21st century. And that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I would like to likewise thanks the organizers of the Pages and Places Festival. I think it's really amazing, actually, in the current climate. Of course, we have a rather strange economic climate, but the climate for literary publishing is even stranger, because it's got the economy to deal with, and it also has massive technological changes to deal with that have basically recast the entire industry. At that time, to be having an inaugural book festival that is coming at literature and community from so many different directions, I think is a really wonderful thing. So I'm really happy that we could be a part of it. My name is Martin Riker. I'm the Associate Director of a thing called Dalkey Archive Press. We are a nonprofit literary organization. We are a book publisher. That's our primary thing that we do. But we think of ourselves more as a literary organization that achieves its mission by means of publishing books, which is kind of an important distinction for us because we have our roots in education. We started in 1980 as a journal, which still exists, called the Review of Contemporary Fiction. The review covers, traditionally has covered one or two authors per issue, mostly authors who were not being written about in the mainstream media at the time. So the review was started in order to cover authors that were considered by the publisher to be of world importance, but just weren't being written about. Or also authors who weren't in the news right at the moment because they were either dead or they didn't have something new coming out. So essentially to put forth a vision of literary culture as being larger than what's happening right here and right now. So the review started up for that purpose. After a few years, it became kind of clear that a number of the authors being written about in the review, and these are just critical essays, it's not scholarly, it's pretty readable. I mean, it's not that scholarly things aren't readable. You know what I mean. It became clear that a number of these authors, their books were not available. They were out of print. One of the changes in the world that we're currently living in is that nothing's going to be out of print very, very soon. But for a long time in the 80s and 90s, things were out of print. In fact, things still are out of print. And so Dalkey Archive actually started in order to bring back into print books that had gone out of print by important writers. As a result, we have some really big-name writers on our list. I mean, American writers like William Gass and Robert Coover and Donald Barthelme. You mentioned Donald Barthelme. And then international writers. We have like 3 Nobel Prize winners on our list. Carlos Fuentes is on our list, and all kinds of interesting people. So it was in, I think, '89 we started doing original titles. It was basically the decision was made that there was enough stuff going on out there that just wasn't getting published that was of interest to us. And then around the mid-'90s, we started getting more and more involved in international literature. We have always, from the very beginning, published international writers, but it became clear that just so little work in translation was being published here that this was an area of our mission that we could sort of devote ourselves to. And now our front list, we publish about 50 books a year, and about 70% of that is literature and translation, which is just, I think we are, I'm pretty sure we're the largest publisher of literature and translation in the English-speaking world, with the possible exception of the American University Cairo, which does like lots of Egyptian books, like a lot of Egyptian books. But we publish about 50 books a year. We have books in print from 38 different countries. We also publish this journal, the Review of Contemporary Fiction, and we have a newsprint magazine that we do called Context, which goes out free to bookstores and English departments and libraries. And the idea of Context was that we wanted to try to reach younger readers. So they're popular writers writing about writers that were important to them, that are within the realm of the authors that we publish. We don't only publish criticism about the writers that we publish, but we publish criticism about the aesthetic that we sort of represent, which I would say generally would be described as kind of innovative fiction, innovative world, and also American fiction. We have offices at the University of Illinois, which is where I flew here from, and we also have an office in London at a thing called the Free Word Center, which just opened up last week, which I'm very excited about. It's actually it's in the old Guardian building on Farringdon Road, if you know London at all. They bought, this Norwegian guy bought out the building and started a Center for Free Expression. And there's 9 organizations there, and it's a Center for Free Expression, Literature, and Literacy. And we're the one book publishing entity in the building. And then English Pen is there, and Index on Censorship, which is a really amazing magazine and organization. And then a number of different British organizations that do different kinds of programming, a lot of the kinds of stuff that Johnny was talking about, actually going out there and developing readers for books. That's the history. I'll talk a little bit about nonprofit publishing because it's a little bit different, just to talk about how it's different from for-profit publishing. And as Johnny was pointing out, the distinction isn't actually about whether or not you make a profit, because there's just nobody making a profit. There's nonprofit. First of all, a lot of people don't know that such a thing as nonprofit publishing exists. It does exist, and there are 7 or 8 rather large nonprofit publishing houses in the U.S. Most of them are in Minneapolis, because there's a very supportive, charitable community for literature there in Minneapolis. And we're at the University of Illinois, and they give us support to allow us to do the kinds of things we do. Essentially, we operate, the best analogy I can make is something like the Museum of Contemporary Art, where they're in Chicago, the MCA. They have, they're doing great art, and if they were just charging ticket price and not getting money from anywhere else, they couldn't do it. I mean, it would be too expensive of an enterprise, but it's something that's important for the culture. It's something important for there to be variety in the visual arts world. Because if you didn't have the MCA or the Art Institute, I'm from Illinois, so I think in terms of Chicago, you would just have art dealers, and that would be a pretty limiting art scene indeed. So pretty much everything we publish is going to be outside the realm of what commercial publishing is going after. And I guess the way I would describe that is commercial publishing is very interested in things that they know are going to sell. Because they're familiar to people and they know they have a track record of people buying them. And we're interested in things that we think people would absolutely love if they had some kind of access to them. If they had some, am I running over time?
2 minutes.
Oh, okay. So we sort of search out these, we're interested in these books that we just think are of just the most highest value imaginable to the literary community, but that for one reason or another, you're going to have a little extra help in getting to. So I do a lot of the marketing for the press, and to give you an example, I could be publishing a book from another country, and it could be a book that would potentially be something you would pick up any day in the U.S., but because you've never heard of the author, you have no reason to pick it up. There's a kind of a myth that Americans don't like to read fiction from other countries. I've never seen evidence of this being true. But I do see every day evidence that it's really hard for anybody to pick up anything by somebody they've never heard of and that they don't have any reason to pick up. You need a reason to pick something up. So my job, a large part of my job, is to figure out how to give you a reason to pick up the stuff that we publish, which is marketing. And in that sense, I do the same job that a guy in a commercial publishing house does. Marketing is actually pretty fascinating. In the nonprofit community, we call marketing audience development, because that's the nonprofit word for marketing. But it essentially means the same thing. You're trying to find readers, whether it's readers just for sake of reading or readers for sake of dollars and sales. And as Johnny was saying, I think the goal of all of us here is to make sure that the literary community in the U.S. has variety. Because a literary community that doesn't have variety is just not going to have any vitality at all. And it's going to be boring. And people are going to stop reading. Because they're just getting the same book over and over and over again. And it's really interesting to me that I go to foreign countries and talk to foreign publishers about their lists, to find books to publish. And they're always trying to give me their best sellers. And their best sellers are always just rip-offs of American bestsellers. And I'm like, and I understand their thinking. They're thinking, this is the book that sold best for me. Obviously, this is the book that the American publishers are going to want to publish. But we have those books already. We don't need those books. I want to find the books that we don't have that will be interesting to us. I mean, us, the American people. It'll be interesting to talk about, to see what kinds of questions everybody has. Like I said, it is a really strange time in American publishing. It's not a time that I'm afraid of for Dalkey Archive, because the technological changes are in a lot of ways making it easier for us to do our job. If your concern is not entirely with selling bound paper, but rather with finding readers for things, then if part of your job is to make sure a book stays in print permanently, well, that's sort of getting taken care of for us. We don't have to absorb massive warehousing costs anymore, because books are going to be available in different formats. Which isn't to say that we're going to stop doing paper books. We are definitely going to keep doing paper books. We're distributed by W.W. Norton. I was hoping they have their warehouse here in town. I was hoping to visit it yesterday, but my flight got messed up. And they distribute us around the world. So we actually have, as of August 1st, we're distributed everywhere, which I'm really happy about. And I'll end by just telling you about an example of a project, which is something we have coming up. This fall, actually in January, we're coming out with the first of an annual series of anthologies called the Best European Fiction series, which is a blatant ripoff of, I guess it's Houghton Mifflin that did the Best American Short Fiction, et cetera, et cetera. So, and Alexander Heeman is the series editor for it, and Zadie Smith gave us a preface for it, and those are probably the only two names in the entire thing you will ever have heard of, because there are a lot of, there are a couple of famous people, Victor Polevin's in it and Alistair Gray, some reasonably well-known European names, but a lot of them are people that are very rarely been published in English, and some of them never have been. So it's a very exciting project, because it's essentially a nice expression of what we do. I'm taking work that we think is of great value, but that you would have no reason to pick up. And we're putting it in a package that's more or less familiar to you, and putting a couple of names on the cover that I hope are familiar to you. And then maybe gives you a reason to pick it up and to find out about all this interesting stuff that's going on in these other countries, in their contemporary literary scenes. And that's sort of what we're about. So that's where I'll stop.
Okay, I might summarize a little bit, or maybe add one comment before we start taking questions. As I was listening to everyone, I was just thank God for independent publishers, Midwest presses and university presses, I might include, and literary magazines, at least personally and professionally. I appreciate them. You mentioned Minnesota. That's Coffee House did my first collection of stories. Good for them. And Grey Wolf is there, and Milkweed, and probably more. I always wonder what's going on in Minneapolis, that they could support publishers like that. And university presses, since the one thing they mention here is I won the Flannery O'Connor Prize once upon a time. University of Georgia couldn't be any better for a literary fiction writer. I can't imagine being treated better than I was there. People who genuinely care about trying to put together the best possible product and get some sort of distribution and attention to the work that you do. So I certainly appreciate it as a writer. What I'd like to do now, since we're just about right on time, is solicit questions. If you have them for one of the three people on the panel, just let me know, or if you're just asking the question and you expect everybody to answer, all I'm going to do is repeat your question and then look at them and get out of the way. So, yes.
I own a Kindle, and I bought 10 books this weekend. I have very good friends who are librarians. One of them said, oh, we're dead in the water. But I use my Kindle for travel because I can never carry as many books. You need one per flight, basically. So if you're traveling internationally, you just can't carry enough books. My question is about, and I have a couple of friends who publish press, actually, translator and decorator. Tri-Quarterly is going, so I'm not anti-technology at all. Tri-Quarterly is going strictly online, and it's moving to the student-run organization. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
Okay, so for my purpose, repeat that. Who's going online?
Tri-Quarterly.
Oh, Tri-Quarterly. Okay, so the question that's been asked is that Tri-Quarterly, a really well-known literary magazine published out of Northwestern, is going online rather than having a print journal. And someone has asked the panelists how they feel about the fact that now a traditional print journal that people recognize in this world is going to be online.
I don't know what my reaction is. I think that some literary magazines, editors change, they go on to other people, and they have new priorities. I hope that when they go online, the format doesn't bother me personally, the change. I certainly know what inspires that, but I just hope that their editorial eye is as strong as the magazine was, which I'm a big fan of. I think it was great and important. I don't know if you're trying to say if it's a sign of things to come. I think everything's changing, and I think that literature and writing is really important to me, and I think that, this is happening in music, this is happening in film, this is happening everywhere because distribution channels have changed, and the way people live and the way they want their content to them is different. So I think everyone's sort of figuring it out. So I guess that's what I'm saying. My full reaction is it's great for Tri-Quarterly. I hope it keeps the magazine going and they publish more writers. If it's online, so be it.
The only thing I would have to add is that with major newspapers are obviously suffering a lot right now and sort of shrinking and shifting more to being online. And one of the negative aspects of that is it seems like reporting is becoming less important. And there's a lot of newspapers just sort of syndicating each other's reporting. And investigative reporting, serious reporting is very, very important on all sorts of different levels. And the shift towards the newspapers going online seems to coincide with the shifting of their staff writers and the focus on reporting. And so that would be my concern, is that Tri-Quarterly is moving to online. My fear would be that it would be a shift toward, a relaxing of their rigid editorial standards that they have upheld. That may or may not be the case, but that would be my concern.
It's Susan Hahn, right? That's a Tri-Quarterly?
Yeah, and they're moving to a student.
And she's not going to be running it anymore?
It's really two issues, the technological
Right.
one and the whole change.
I think it's for me, the thing that's scarier is not the technological. In fact, that doesn't scare me at all. The thing about that is that I think the problem, not having known what you just said until you just said it, I think that the problem is more having to do with the nature of universities, and they're changing their attitude towards supporting university publication. In the past few years, we've seen a shift from universities seeing the university press as being an institute that they would put money into in order to represent the intellectual ethics of the university, into now seeing it as a money-making endeavor. That hit Northwestern University Press very hard some years ago, six or 7 years ago now, maybe even longer, where they practically went out of business, Northwestern University Press. And it's hit a lot of university presses. I know Louisiana, there was an article about Louisiana. I think they may, I don't want to misspeak, but I have something drastic happened there. I don't know if they shut down or what exactly it was. This change in the philosophy of universities towards what the function of the university press is I would say is extremely alarming. It puts a burden on learning and on publishing of scholarly materials that was never there before. If you look at even the really great university presses, places like Harvard and University of Chicago and Yale, their lists are still great, but their burden on marketing is very different than it was 10 years ago, and certainly different than it was 20 years ago. The kinds of books they're coming out with there's much less emphasis on what we might call hard scholarship, and much more emphasis on kind of popular intellectual culture. No, I don't think that's. I have nothing against popular intellectual culture, but I like hard scholarship too, and I would hate to see it disappear. I actually think technology provides an opportunity for these things to keep going, rather than being the death of this kind of content. Technology, in that case, it makes it cheaper to produce a scholarly monograph, for instance, than it previously was. It's less of an investment on the press's part. Of course, as Johnny's saying, you need to invest in the intellectual production side of things. And in journalism, that's a real problem. In academia, the intellectual production side of things is already happening. It's how people get their job raises. It's how you get your tenure. But there's nobody to publish it anymore because the universities aren't putting the money towards scholarly publication. That's a bit of a generalization, probably too much of a generalization, but that's what worries me about what you're talking about.
If I can add, there are some magazines that go through transition, and I mean, in the internet now, you can sort of figure out what happened if there's an editorial shift, but a lot of times I'll pick up a magazine and it looks different than I remember it too, so you can find out what happened. And something like Virginia Quarterly Review, I don't know, I haven't researched it, but they're obviously getting a lot of money. They have a beautiful, huge bound quarterly, and they're getting a lot of investigative journalism. They must have changed their focus. In addition to their fiction, there's, dynamite writing in their journalism. So I assume that, there at the university, I don't even know, is it university run still, Virginia Quarterly? I don't know, it's an impressive piece, and they're going in that direction, and they must be getting support from the university. So while there's some that might be slipping, I know there's been a few, I read recently online where a few were struggling, really big literary magazines, but I think everyone goes through it, and hopefully you get the support from the university, but sometimes you got to jump universities, or it happens with part of it, and hopefully academia still honors it and respects it as much as we do, or you can go outside of the academia realm and do it yourself.
Boy, there's no question somebody put money into Virginia Quarterly Review. The difference between the way that looks now and the way it used to is
it's lovely.
Somebody's invested really heavily in that magazine.
I should say that Dalkey Archive is completely reliant on funding from the University of Illinois, and they've been absolutely terrific for us. I mean, we work with students and so forth, but I think that their real interest is just in furthering the mission. They see furthering the mission of Dalkey Archive as being furthering the mission of their own institution. And I think that's really important.
Another question? Yes.
You mentioned two words that I'd like to define. You said fiction and you said diversity. So if someone led a life that everyone doesn't believe really happened and they wrote about it, would that count as fiction?
Okay, the question that's been asked in reference to the terms fiction and diversity used in juxtaposition, a kind of cynical question about memoirs. And the question is, if someone lived a fantastic life that really never happened, is that considered fiction?
Well, specifically because you said you publish fiction, and so.
Okay, so it would simply be an imagined life. It wouldn't be published as a memoir that lies to us. That's not what you're talking
I
about.
hadn't gotten that far.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I still don't quite, I can't quite get my head around the question.
Okay.
If
It's just regarding the definition of fiction. How unreal does that have to be called fiction?
in terms of my list, is that what you're asking about, or?
Yes, your company. You mentioned.
Oh,
you said
yeah,
you
yeah.
publish
We don't.
fiction.
Well, see, we don't publish exclusively fiction. So
Okay.
we publish fiction and nonfiction. Most of our list is fiction. So I guess it's a moot question. We would never disqualify. We would never not consider a book for publication because we couldn't quite figure out how to classify it.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So as independent publishers, marketing or audience development is probably a really big deal for you. And I know when I wander airports, specifically when I have time to read a book, I don't really love reading books. It's usually when you have that chunk of time you're flying or something. And you name so many authors today, and I don't even know any of them, which is okay. I'm an architect, I can name a lot of architects that are really well known, but probably not everybody here would know. So how do you, and I often just find my mind swirling with what book should I really spend my time reading? I really want a good book. I don't want to take a chance here. And that often pushes me towards nonfiction. So, because, okay, this is probably sure they can learn about that, or whatever. So how do you deal with that? Or how do you try to sort of navigate the fact that A, you're dealing with the big publishers, and B, you're dealing with people with so much out there to choose from, who really want guidance and help?
Okay, the question is, I think if I sort of synthesize it, it is really, I think, for independent publishers, how to allow an audience that is probably going to be almost completely unfamiliar with the authors on their lists. How do you let people know, who those people are and why it is they should be reading those books, or at least looking into those books? Or I think perhaps if somebody wants to speak to it, how do you even get those books in a place, like Coca-Cola pays for the space in the grocery store. So of course you're going to see it. And big publishers pay for that space in Borders, and it's not a coincidence that such and such an author is on. You can't miss it. But on the other hand, if there's one copy of an author's book back and just facing spine out on a bookshelf, you don't know who those people are, and it's an accident if you ever look at it. So the question, I think, is really about marketing, as far as I could tell.
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's one that I ask myself every single day. At the risk of making you blush, I think Johnny is actually pretty much the best marketing person in the entire independent press community. No, I really do. But I deal with it, so I'll let him talk more than I do on this question. But it's sort of what I was talking about. I mean, we have to ask ourselves that question. There's reviews, obviously, but not everybody reads reviews. So what can you do? You can get your newsletter group, and then once you get the review, you can newsletter people and let them know about the review so they can read about the book and so forth. I think in the independent press community, there's a bigger emphasis on branding than like with most commercial houses. You'll pick up their book and you don't know who published it. In fact, with most books generally, you pick up a book and you don't know who published it. But I think that one of the strategies that independent presses, and I'm including nonprofit as just independent, have been pretty successful at pushing is trying to brand the books as being, we are specific. We do a specific kind of book, and if you are interested in that kind of book, you can come to us. In the old days, they used to have in bookstores shelves that were actually organized by publisher. And you could go see the New Directions Publishing Company. It's a great independent house. It's been around for many, many years. And you could go to the New Direction shelf, and all their books were black and white. So you could see their shelf a million miles away because it's the only black and white shelf, And you could just go there, and you knew it was a New Directions book. So it's going to be, you knew what kind of thing it was going to be. And we try to do some of that. But I also try to market each book individually. And I try... Basically, I try everything I can think of. But like I said, I'm going to let Johnny talk more about that.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That's a huge compliment. It's, trying, just echoing what he just said, we wrestle with the question every single day. You try every single thing you can think of. You try to be creative about it. A couple more specific comments. I think that more than reviews or anything else, what'll sell the book, what'll make you pick up the book is because a friend of yours recommends it to you. So word of mouth, getting a buzz going on a book is like, that's really what you want. And in fact, and I just think like there's many ways to try to get a buzz going on a book and try to get people talking about a book. But if you can get a bunch of people talking about a book, you're going to do a lot better than a New York Times book review. You'd be amazed how you can get a book reviewed in the New York Times, and I know our books get reviewed in the New York Times, but you'd be amazed at how little, as an isolated event, a New York Times book review will do for your book sales. It's just one event. What you need is to create a snowball of various things happening, but the New York Times review on its own does very, very little, unless it's a particular feature story, and there are exceptions, but it's pretty impressive sometimes how few books New York Times book review can sell for you. Now, in terms of you're in an airport, you're browsing the bookstore. A lot of our marketing is marketing to the retailers, to the bookstores themselves. In general, over time, we're trying to create a reputation for publishing great books. And that's one of the ways that you get bookstores to pay attention to you is like, oh, Dalkey Archives, they publish great books. We're gonna, we see their new list and we're gonna, buy 2 copies of this, 2 copies of this, 5 copies of this because we know they do great work. It's the same with the reviewers. You don't need to be Simon & Schuster to get your book reviewed, but you need to have been in business for a while and have developed a reputation. So anyway, we spend a lot of time marketing our books to booksellers, and we try to market our books to airport. A lot of people buy books in bookstores. Certain books that we publish are more likely to be bought by airport booksellers. So we're not trying to convince the airport bookseller to buy every book on our list. We're identifying the books on our list that are more likely to be for them to pay attention to. Then, hugely important, you need a really good book cover. You can't judge a book by, you can't always judge a book by its cover, but you can usually judge a book by its cover. And well, maybe actually I'm getting off topic here. You need a really good book cover, and you need it to be face out at the front of the bookstores. One way to do that is to pay the bookstore to put your book face out. The other way is to just work the booksellers, to develop relationships, to go into the bookstores, make friends with the store clerks. When at the front of a bookstore, a lot of the books that are there stacked in the front, whether it's a Barnes & Noble or whatever, or anthology, well, probably an anthology here. I don't know if booksellers actually pay money for prominent placement, but at the chains, and a lot of airport stores, you can pay for that space. But what a lot of independent publishers don't realize is there's other ways to get your book at the front of the stores, and it's through working the store clerks and developing relationships. So you need to develop a buzz. You need a great package. The book needs to look great. You want the reviews. So you're sort of coming at it from all levels. But our books do make it into airport stores, and you may buy one of our books. You may not know it's an Akashic book, but a lot of bookstore purchases happen. People browse the front of the stores at the place where the books are piled up high, and that's a reality. That's not an ideal thing for an independent bookseller, but it's just another challenge that we embrace. I can't change that, or I can try to change it through things that are going to, efforts I'm going to be making on a long term. But on the immediate level, I need to sell books. So I need to do whatever I can to get my book in that airport store, even though I'm a tiny company. It can be done. You just have to be creative and extremely persistent.
We're down to the last 2 or 3 minutes, so I'm going to stop and see if there's one more question that we can squeeze in here. Look at that. Look at all those questions. Who has the most important question? Who has it? I don't know. I don't know. I'll just try the person right here. Here you go.
I was just wondering what advantages are there for authors to be published by independent publishers over the mainstream?
Okay, that's an easy one to translate for the audience. The question is, what advantages are there for authors for publishing with the sort of publishers that are represented here today, independent publishers, mid-list presses, and so on, as opposed to a large commercial house?
I can take a quick stab at that.
Sure.
I can say the disadvantage, there's only one disadvantage of going with an independent publisher, is that we can't pay the kind of money up front that a big publisher can. And this is a simplification, but on all other levels, we can compete. Our books don't sell in big numbers. If you take your average literary work, if you could see the sales figures of a Dalkey archive book and a Simon & Schuster book for a literary work, they're not going to be very different, and the Dalkey archive author is going to be a lot happier.
I won't take issue with that. My feeling about this is that every author should go to the publishing house that publishes the books that are like the ones that they love. If there are times when the kinds of work that we publish a specific kind of work. We don't publish the kinds of books that Random House publishes. If we did, then they'd be published by Random House, probably. We're not like a farm team for Random House.
It's true.
There are times when authors who publish the kinds of books who write the kinds of books that we publish will get on a commercial house's list, and they think, I broke into the commercial, and then they come back to us and they say, actually, they treated us like we didn't exist. We were like the bottom tier, and they didn't put anything into it. Whereas at Dalkey, we'll put as much into every single book as we can. As we do to every other book. But we're also not going to be interested in an author who's a Random House author. We're just not. It's just not what we do. It's nothing personal. So I'm having to deal with this now because a lot of authors are getting dropped from commercial publishing houses because of the cutbacks, and they're coming to us, and they're sort of thinking, well, I have to step down to an independent publisher. And I'm like, well, keep stepping.
Yeah. It's totally every single day. It's totally true.
It's just, basically, if your number one priority is making money, then you're going to publish anything that makes money. If your number one priority is publishing a certain kind of book, then you're going to spend all your time trying to figure out how to make money off that kind of book. But you're not going to publish any other kind of book, or find readers for whatever. So I think that's the way I would answer your question.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. The distinction that Martin just made, I think, is maybe the most important distinction that I heard today as someone who's published with these sorts of presses. They publish different authors, they like different kinds of work, as opposed to weaker farm team authors. You know, God help us. No, it's a whole different kind of publishing.
The entire poetry community.
Yeah, yes, you know, because I publish fiction and poetry. Yeah, it's a whole different world. So thank you all for coming. Yeah, that distinction.